Love and Loss, a cautionary tale about climate change and the virtue of finding one's purpose. The Wild Robot may be a kid's movie at heart, but there's a lot of things in the film that only adults will notice. When Razum 7134 initially arrives on the island, her behavior around the animals is marked by a comedic contrast between the harshness of nature and the robot's cheerful, upbeat tone and demeanor. Although a lot of that humor is pitched to children and adults alike, much of the fun in that early section of The Wild Robot gains an extra layer if you're a grown-up who's familiar with the 21st century aesthetics of Silicon Valley's products and services. In her factory-ready interactions with the island environment, Roz behaves rather like an avatar of tech-world frictionless design and commercial faux helpfulness. Her smooth metal body alone causes destruction and disturbance due to its clunking movement, loud noises, and sudden light flashes. She repeatedly offers help and assistance even though the animals don't need her.
Do you need assistance?
At one point, she starts handing out stickers with a code that offers a 10% discount on some product, meaning there'd still be more for a human to buy from Universal Dynamics even after purchasing her. She's essentially an intrusive ad and a parasitic free trial rolled into one. It's impossible to look at the image of various animals covered in discount stickers and not think of the many apps and services we have to deal with every day. Life in the wild is a cruel, unforgiving thing. The vast majority of family-friendly animated films go light in their depiction of what it's like for wild animals trying to survive, which is understandable. The Wild Robot also spares viewers from the graphic violence, but otherwise, it's shockingly candid. Very early on in the film, the animals surround Roz and ask if she intends to harm them. The second she says no, a moose headbutts her, and everyone breathes a sigh of relief at Roz's apparent demise. Having the entire cast pragmatically attempt to kill the protagonist in the first few minutes is not the kind of thing you see in most kid-friendly animated movies. However, it's a 100% realistic and sensible thing for the animals to do in this context. An important aspect of The Wild Robot and its storytelling is the fact that Roz is a completely benign robot. She specifically makes a point of telling the animals that her programming bans her from doing deliberate harm to others. Even after she's gone beyond her programming, it's still never even remotely within question if she might hurt any of the other characters. Which is not to say that she couldn't hurt the other characters. Although Roz doesn't actually use any of her tools and abilities for harm, the movie quietly demonstrates that she has immense lethal potential. For starters, of course, she's big and strong enough that she could easily kill any of the smaller animals on the island, and the fact that she's near indestructible means that most of the larger ones would probably be no match for her either. On top of that, when Fink steals the egg and hides in a fallen tree trunk, Roz uses a powerful buzzsaw to slash right through the trunk with ease, stopping just shy of the fox's face. Every animal on the island is subject to the hostility of others, but in the case of Paddler the beaver, that hostility isn't merely physical, it's moral. The other animals mock and ostracize Paddler for his passion for carpentry and woodwork, and fail to understand why he enjoys that work and its results so much. In other words, Paddler is an artist, and he faces many of the same trials as those who create art in the human world. Just as artists are often judged and misunderstood for wanting to hone their craft instead of opting for a more economically useful field, the animals don't see why the beaver would go against the basic wildlife law of preserving energy and resources by focusing on things that are necessary for survival. And just as society fails to understand the necessity and the importance of artists until art proves crucial to people's lives, the animals on the island only really understand Paddler's worth when they suddenly need his tree trunk to put out a fire. In that moment, they understand Paddler's vision. It becomes clear that things that may not immediately appear to be useful in a day-to-day sense may still be of great value just for the fact that nobody else has thought to do them. In the end, Paddler's freedom of spirit saves the day. The plot of The Wild Robot essentially consists of a series of small, meaningful gestures. Each one leads Roz to stray further and further from her initial programming, thereby transforming her from a mere machine to a subject with the capacity to think and feel independently. Early on, she's depicted as an algorithm trying to feel her way through an environment for which she was not prepared. Even her decision to raise Brightbill happens because of a task assignment given by Pinktail. Things begin to change in one key moment. While building a shelter for herself and Brightbill, Roz is still following the task pretty stringently. Then Brightbill offers his help by bringing a tiny stick to stack up with the branches. Although Roz initially dismisses his inefficient participation because it will slow the process, She ultimately feels bad for him and lets him contribute just once. This ultimately turns into repeatedly lifting him up so he can add more and more tiny sticks to the shelter. In that moment, by letting Bright Bill help despite his ineffectiveness and accepting his inefficiency to humor him, Roz approaches humanity for the first time. She's no longer just trying to complete the task. She also cares about Bright Bill on an emotional level and wants to see him happy.
I want to become more than I was programmed to be.
Becoming human is not easy. When Roz is just a machine carrying out tasks, her life is pretty existentially breezy. Any problems she comes across are only problems insofar as they're deterrents to completing certain tasks. The ones she can solve are then dealt with as efficiently as possible, while any problems that render a task impossible to complete will simply result in its cancellation. When she starts developing a soul, things get significantly more complicated.
You are defective. I feel fine.
The melancholy second to third act stretch of The Wild Robot, in which Roz is wandering the island alone and trying to figure out what to do now that Bright Bill has flown away with his peers, is colored by a realization that comes right on the heels of her burgeoning humanity. Now that she's able to love others, she also has something to lose. Caring that deeply about Bright Bill means that she'll always be at risk of feeling hurt if anything should happen to him. It also means that when he's not around, she's going to miss him. The greatest of all human capacities, the capacity to love, makes her immediately vulnerable in a way that she wasn't before. The Wild Robot largely plays coy about its post-climate catastrophe future Earth setting, but we do get at least one big piece of information. As the geese migrate, there is a shot of them flying over the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's completely submerged. The sea level has risen so much, in fact, that an entire whale can be seen swimming over the iconic San Francisco landmark. It's a consensus among climate scientists that sea levels around the globe are rising at an alarming rate due to the melting of the ice caps, and are likely to rise even higher if current carbon emission trends are not dramatically reversed. Absolute worst-case scenario projections currently indicate that the seas could rise by up to 72 feet by 2300 if global warming reaches 5 degrees Celsius. This would be enough to wipe out entire coastal cities, but not quite enough to cover the Golden Gate Bridge, which stands 220 feet above the Golden Gate Strait. In other words, the Wild Robot seems to suggest a future in which humans have screwed things up so badly that there are no ice caps left. In that terrifying scenario, some entire countries would be submerged, in addition to virtually all coastal cities on the planet. It sure explains the greenhouses and the general absence of humans. That said, this is pretty much a post-apocalyptic movie. For all its surprising frankness, The Wild Robot is still a kids' movie, and as such, there's a limit to how dark it gets. This is true of the film's climate change angle. It's pretty bold for a family-oriented animation, but without quite going as far as it could. If The Wild Robot did go all the way, it would have to acknowledge that most ecosystems would not come out unscathed once humans were gone, most likely including the island. Despite the humans are a blight and the Earth will be better off without us takes you see going around sometimes, a cataclysmic climate scenario capable of rising sea levels by hundreds of feet would also dramatically impact wildlife. In this case, the higher temperatures alone would make life impossible for many of the animals seen in the movie. The Wild Robot critiques the Earth's destruction, but still falls back on the kind of bucolic humanless Earth imagery that sometimes renders misanthropes more or less unfazed about climate change. One of the most quietly puzzling things about The Wild Robot is the fact that Universal Dynamics expends so many resources, so much money, and so much effort on the task of retrieving Roz. This is because Roz is a ROSM unit that is hard to locate, does not want to be retrieved, and can easily be replaced in any of its functions by an identical ROSM unit. Equally mystifying is the fact that Universal Dynamics seemingly has access to some sort of military-grade control panel with which it can track down its units all over the world. This points to two things. First, it's a company with a lot of money. Second, it's got vested interests in Roz's capture that go beyond tending to basic consumer needs. No possible assistant robot applications could be augmented enough by Roz's forest experiences to justify the massive spending to capture her. What companies build advanced machines and make a ton of money but don't sell to casual consumers? Weapons manufacturing companies. That's the most viable explanation for Roz's helpful yet potentially destructive design. ROSM units may well be equipped for military action in addition to their assistant services. It would also explain why Universal Dynamics is so desperate to retrieve her and mine her for information. A ROSM upgraded with Roz's experiences would not be all that much more useful for someone who just wants to do gardening and banking. But for someone who wants to hurt and destroy more efficiently, she's a goldmine. At its heart, The Wild Robot is a story about what it means to have a purpose. The thing that differentiates ROSM Unit 7134 from Roz is the way in which she begins to wrestle with that question. When she's simply following protocols, Roz doesn't wrestle with her purpose at all, because she's been designed to execute whatever tasks she's been given. The evolved Roz, meanwhile, doesn't need to follow any tasks. She is now able to choose whether to obey her factory directives or not.
You are ordered to return home.
I am already home.
Past a certain point, she isn't helping Bright Bill because there is an externally handed reason to devote herself to that purpose. She's helping him because she wants to help him, and chooses to commit to that. She embraces raising and parenting Bright Bill in order to have a purpose. That moment in which Roz chooses to stick to a purpose is also the moment she achieves true psychological depth. That's what life is. We give it meaning ourselves and commit to that meaning.